welcome to the greenhouse. This is our second lecture here. This is a lecture on Morse paradigm. This is one of many that we plan to have to bring the family out, to bring information and knowledge that we're not accustomed to hearing. So we're here again at the greenhouse, and with us we have Brother Hakim Bey, who will be the lecturer today, who will share the information and knowledge with us. Thank you.
Greet everybody. Islam. Today we're going to get into a pretty heavy topic, and what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to kind of start from the beginning, because I told the brother when I came out here that, you know, this is my first time speaking out here. I don't know how much background everybody has. I see there's some people that have a background in more science, history, and heritage, and I know there will probably be some people out here that do not. So what I'm going to do is really just give a basic overview of the whole picture. I'm not going to go into anything too deep, but that depends. It's relative, you know what I'm saying? It depends on where you're at. But in the course of my studies, I've been doing research for a long period of time now, since '81. So that's been about 23 years I've been doing this research. So I've done over 15,000 hours of research. And what I've done is I've taken some of the information that the Moorish elders told us. See, because the Moorish elders told us a lot of things about our heritage, things that was totally contrary to everything we learned in school. But they didn't give us the documents and the information to substantiate what they were saying. They just more or less just told us, this is this, this is that. And we had to go through the background research. Our generation had to do the background research to prove what they were saying. So it was in a sense, it was like working out an equation backwards. In a sense, they gave us the answer. And now we had to go work out the equation. But in the process of working out the equation, you know, we was able to learn certain things. So over the period of time, I've gathered a whole lot. This is just a small tidbit of the information that I've gathered over the years. And what I've done is I published a journal called Journal of the Moorish Paradigm. And the reason why I published a journal is because on many occasions I had planned to write a book based on the research I was doing. But what kept happening to me is that every time I felt I was ready to write the book, then I would get another piece of information, and I'd be like, oh, wait, I gotta wait till I get this digested first, and then I'll write the book. And it just kept happening and happening, and I never was getting around to actually writing a book. So I said, what I need to do is publish a journal, so that as I'm getting information, I can just publish it in the journal, since the journal is more or less ongoing. And so that's what I decided to do, was publish a journal. And in this journal, I began to put out the fruits of my research. I have stacks and stacks of boxes and books, with all kinds of information. And it's not doing me no good sitting at home. It's not doing our people no good sitting at home. So I said I might as well put it out there for critique or for whatever purpose. And in the journals, I say in my preface that, you know, I don't claim to be infallible. You know, I'm just doing research, and if there's anybody out there that sees something wrong or see an error or whatever, point it out to me, and I'll post the correction in my journals. These journals are also available online at www.newatlantis.com. And so you can also go there. I have the first issue online for free. You can go through the whole first issue, check it out, see what it's dealing with, and you can also view the other issues online also. All right, so what I'm going to do today is that I'm basically going to do a little more science, history, and heritage 101 type of thing. We're going to cover some of the basic information showing that what we've been taught in school is totally reversed or misguided. And it's not by a coincidence, it's by design. You know, a lot of what we learn in schools, a lot of the basic principles dealing with archaeology, anthropology, the social sciences, was developed after the Civil War. Right around that period, 1865, right around that time. This is also the same time when it was perfected their white supremacy paradigm. And so, as they drawn up this paradigm of white supremacy, and we got to keep in mind that white supremacy is based on an inferiority complex. It's the reverse of what we think it is. See, when the Europeans were bottled up in Europe for the most part. And when they began to explore the world in 1492 and so on and so forth, they began to come in contact with our civilizations around the world. And so they actually began to feel inferior. And so what happened, was that they developed this white supremacy paradigm as a defense mechanism. It's the same way like a man who, let's say, feels insecure in his manhood, he goes out of the way to try to act extra macho. That's a defense mechanism, so that's what the white supremacy was. And so when they drew up this white supremacy paradigm, anything in the social sciences and the different sciences that was coming out at that time, the theory of evolution, all this stuff, anything that contradicted that was swept underneath the rug. And so that led to, there's a whole series of artifacts, a whole lot of things that didn't fit that paradigm and that's been pushed to the side. I actually found a whole book, I found a book called OOP Arts, OOP Arts. And in it talks about all these different artifacts that was found all over the world that don't fit their paradigm. Stuff like, where they say like, there was no humans during the time of dinosaurs. Yet right here in North America, they found two sets of footprints. They found a set of human footprints and a set of dinosaur footprints crisscrossing. And so some people say, oh, that's a hoax, somebody did that or whatever the case may be. But what was interesting is that it continued under a rock face, and it continued underneath it, which means the person would have had to crawl underneath the rock space to actually do that hoax. There's a whole lot of things like that. They found these spherical walls, metal walls in South Africa, dating back like 200 million years old. Totally contrary to what they put forth in terms of the history of the earth and everything. So these things you don't hear about. They just get swept underneath the rug because it doesn't fit their paradigm. And so there's a wide field of information out there for us to uncover, stuff that's just been hidden and suppressed. And I'm going to touch on some of these things today, dealing with it. So what I'm going to basically do is I'm going to take about an hour and a half to really go through this, and then I want to leave a good half hour for question and answers during that time, all right? So I'm just going to go right into it. You may want to shut down the lights. I'm going to start off right here with, this is Prophet Ali. He's the man who first began to uncover our hidden Moorish heritage here. He came and he began his movement in 1913. And he and his movement was known as the Moorish Divine and National Movement, was the foundation of most of the movements that you see that came later on. Elijah Muhammad, the Nation of Islam, were once members of the Moorish Science Temple. Father Divine, Daddy Grace, a whole slew of people who came up behind the Ali had their foundation right in the Ali. So it's weird that in our community, maybe 9, or I should say that's less now. It was one time I should say 9 out of 10 of our people don't even know who he is. But since our generation now began doing this research and teaching now, I would say maybe about 6 out of every 10. And now we don't know who he is. But even that's still bad because this man really laid the foundation of much of what you see today in terms of the different movements. And people to this day still don't fathom what this man really done. I mean, not only did this government recognize him, but different governments around the world recognized him and what he set up. And so now you get a lot of talk about reparations and so on and so forth. What's happening is that there's a lot of reinventing of the wheel going on because he already set the whole thing up. He already set up various mechanisms with the government that will allow us to get our reparations back and allow us to receive payment for all the hundreds of years of labor, that they received. The mechanism is already set up, but we never put it into working yet. And he did say that. He said it would take me almost 50 years just to figure out what I've already done. He knew that the generation that he was working with at that time, many was illiterate, many was, didn't have no inkling of who we were. He knew it would take at least 50 years before we just began to figure out what he done. And I'm just going to read a couple of things here, just to lay the foundation of what he was trying to do in his own statements. See, he realized that this government here, and I'm trying to think what I should get into this part now. You know what? Let me just leave this like this. I'm going to come back to this. Because if I get into it now, you won't really see the full significance of it. So what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to go through the lecture, and then I'm going to come full circle back to this, and then you will see the significance of Prophet Ali, what he's done. Just keep in mind that it was Noble Ali who was the first one that began to uncover our hidden Moorish heritage. And there was a reason for this. See, long ago, leave it over. I'm about to put transparency on. We should put transparency on what I'm talking. Long ago, our ancestors had an empire that went from Africa across the Atlantic Ocean to North, South, and Central America. So the Europeans would have us to believe that all of us was brought over here from Africa in slave ships. That's one of the biggest lies ever told. That's not true. We've always been here. We were always on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. When the Europeans first came here, he seen us here. But it goes even deeper than that. Because before he even left Europe, he seen us there. That's right. And I'm going to talk about that too. It gets deep. Like they say, truth is stranger than fiction. And see, I'm glad that we did this research. Because before when we used to say this, they say, well, that's just you more saying that. Show me something else that corroborates what you're saying. So I have a whole lot of information here coming from European sources who don't have no interest in putting this information forth for our benefit. You see what I'm saying? So that will show you that what I'm saying, what we're saying here is true. And so it was a game that was played. It was a game that was played. When we fell from power, they had to like totally disorientate us in terms of space and time. You know, they threw off chronology, they changed the chronology of the planet in history, and they also changed the geography. And just totally disorientated us, knowing that our power, our strength laid in our foundation, our history, our heritage. That was our foundation. They knew the saying that a tree without roots cannot stand. A little wind comes and just topple it right over. And so that's what they did. They cut the roots right out from underneath us, and they grafted themselves onto those roots. So that's why Muhammad referred to them as a grafted people and a grafted civilization. And I'm not just not to condemn them, but this is to say that what they did was steal your history and your birthright and graft themselves onto it. This aspect of this you won't even believe. You hear them always talk about the Greeks this and the Greeks that. You know, now a lot of Afrocentric historians uncovered the fact that, like the Stolen Legacy, George James, that they got it from Egypt. That knowledge, but it gets even deeper, because when you look deeper, you find that the original people of Greece was us. We were the original inhabitants of Greece. The areas called Rome, the Etruscans, all that was our ancestors. Our people is a vast worldwide people. Honorable Muhammad said that wherever the European went, either he found us there or traces that we already had been there. We had a worldwide civilization that dealt with the whole planet, but long ago, we sort of split the planet in half. And that story gets into the story of Ham, Cush, Canaan, and all that stuff in the Bible, dealing with Noah's sons. That's where that whole division came up. That after, in 1500 BC, there was a series of worldwide cataclysms that took place, worldwide. And after that series of worldwide cataclysms, the land was reallotted to various families. That's when you got Ham, you got Japheth, you got Shem, and all the stuff like that. It's dealing with the reallotment of lands after a major cataclysm on the planet. A series of cataclysms. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let me now jump into this. This is taken from a book put out by Noble Ali called the Moorish Science Temple Quran. And in chapter 47 of that book, we consider that to be our deed, or the title to our land. It's almost like how back a long time ago, our parents used to put deeds and stuff in the Bible, and then pass the Bible down like that, and they used to put a lot of important documents in that. Well, the same thing what Noble Ali did with the Moorish Science Temple Quran, he embedded our title within the book itself, and which is chapter 47, that deals with our heritage. And so, even though the book is considered a spiritual religious book, it has legal connotations. And I forgot my laser pointer, so just got to bear with me. I'm just going to kind of point it out. What it says here, this is from chapter 47 of the Moorish Science Temple Quran. Let me pull out a copy so you can see it. This is the Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America. And notice the seal on it, circle 7. I'm going to get back to this in a minute. I don't really want to pass it around. This is very simple. I don't want to just pass it around like that, but this is more or less the book here, circle 7. And I'll have information how, those who are interested can get the book and everything like that. But circle 7, more signs of Quran. This is chapter 47 of it. It says, the inhabitants of Africa are descendants of the ancient Canaanites from the land of Canaan. Old man Cush and his family are the first inhabitants of Africa who came from the land of Canaan. His father Ham and his family were second. This is dealing with after the cataclysms took place. Then came the word Ethiopia, which means the demarcation line of the dominion of Amexem, the first true and divine name of Africa. Notice this word Amexem. That's from which derived the word Mexico as well as America. And it says here, the dividing of the land between the father and the son, between Ham and Cush. The dominion of Cush was northeast. Imagine if you had a map of Africa. Y'all know how Africa looked. It said the dominion of Cush was northeast, over there, Ethiopia, all that, of northeast and southeast Africa, right? And northwest and southwest were his father's dominion of Africa. In later years, many of their brethren from Asia and the Holy Lands joined them. Keep that sentence in mind. This is going to be very important. You're going to see how this all ties in. In later years, many of their brethren from Asia and the Holy Lands joined them. And this is why also Honorable Elijah Muhammad referred to us as the Asiatic. He got that from Louis Ali, who was the first one referred to us as Asiatics. Not Negroes, not niggas, not blacks, not colors, not Africans, but Asiatics, because at one time the whole planet, the whole landmass, the land part of the planet was known as Asia. And when you study Kabbalah, the bottom level is called Asia, or Asias, or some derivative of that. And it says here, the Moabites from the land of Canaan, the Moabites from the land of Moab, who had received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle and inhabit northwest Africa. Keep that in mind. They were the founders and are the true possessors of the present Moroccan Empire, with their Canaanite, Hittite, and Amorite brethren who sojourned from the land of Canaan seeking new homes. I'm going to talk about why they were seeking new homes. Their dominion and habitation extended from northeast and southwest Africa across the great Atlantis or Atlantic Ocean, even unto the present North, South, and Central America, and also Mexico and the Atlantis Islands or the Caribbean. Before the great earthquake which caused the great Atlantic Ocean. All right, I'm going to stop right there. What's going on here? There's two main theories of ecological evolution of the planet Earth. You have the gradualist theory, and you have the catastrophist or the cataclysmic theory. The gradualist theory says that the Earth changes slowly over millions and millions of years. The continents separate, moving like an inch every 100,000 years, that type of stuff. Whereas the cataclysmic said, no, the Earth don't change like that. The Earth evolution has been punctuated with drastic change in a short period of time, where there has been drastic catastrophes that happened, that pushed up mountains, that separated continents in a short period of time. One of the Europeans who uncovered this was a man by the name of Emmanuel Velikovsky. And because he uncovered this, he was castigated, his books was destroyed, they stopped printing. They did a whole number on this particular European because he put this information out. He also put out information relative to this, what I'm saying here. And so what actually took place, when you look at the geological record, you'll find out that 1,500 years before Christ, or 3,500 years ago, there was a massive series of worldwide cataclysms that took place. And much of what has been attributed to the Ice Age is actually a result, they say Ice Age took place 10 to 15,000 years ago. Well, much of what they attribute to that actually took place more recently. We're talking about 3,500 years ago, right during the time of the historical record. And you can find this recorded in the historical records of Egypt, Mesopotamia, all over the world, Mexico, all over the world. You can find a record of this. Even in the Bible, it's recorded as the flood. and also recorded as the Tower of Babel. It was a series of worldwide cataclysms that manifested differently in different locations. So in some locations it manifested as volcanic eruption, like Thera and Santorini in the Mediterranean in 1500 BC. Other places it manifested as earthquakes, other places as flood. So depending on who was writing, who was recording what took place, will determine whether or not they will say it was a flood like the Bible, and so on and so forth. All right, but keep that in mind, 1500 BC. And so that goes back to the reason why there was this mass migration. Now, I want to cover something very interesting regarding this. Most of the historians, European as well as Afrocentric historians, recognize that somewhere around 1500 BC, there was a massive invasion of Egypt by so-called people called the Hyksos. Now, standard history say that the Hyksos, they must have been barbaric or whatever, because right around that time, they destroyed the temples and artwork in Egypt. But that's wrong. And the Afrocentric scholars also say, oh, they must have been some barbaric Europeans who came into Egypt just destroying things. That's wrong. The reason why they thought the Hyksos destroyed those things was because of the cataclysms that took place in 1500 BC. It was the cataclysms that destroyed those temples and destroyed those works of art. And it was those same cataclysms that led to this massive migration from the areas of Canaan, Mesopotamia, and Arabia westward into Africa. Those were our ancestors who were originally in those regions of Mesopotamia, Canaan, Egypt, and that area over there. When the cataclysms hit, they all picked up. Not all of them, but the majority of them picked up. And they all went into Egypt. And they were known as the Hyksos to the modern historians. Now, when they got to Egypt, Egypt was in a state of disarray, confusion, because of the cataclysms. It was those Canaanites and Moabites that restored order in Egypt and ruled as the pharaohs of Egypt from that point. And it was those same Moabite Canaanite pharaohs that gave the permission. They said the Moabites from the land of Moab who received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt settled and inhabited Northwest Africa. So it was a mass migration. They came into Egypt, took over Egypt, and didn't allow the rest of their brothers to continue on over into North and West Africa, North, South, and Central America. This is why when you look at the tribes of West Africans to this day, the Nigerians, the Yoruba, the Hausa, the Akan, they will all tell you that we came from further east and north. And as a matter of fact, the Hausa will tell you that they came from where? Canaan, and they came from what they call today Iraq or Mesopotamia. The Yoruba, they will tell you, yeah, we came from Arabia, Yemen, so on and so forth. See, the tribe you see in West Africa there now, there was constant migrations, layers coming into there. This is why you got this whole history amongst them of them coming from further east and west, and it's also recorded in the Arabic historians. It's also recorded in the Arabic historians. Now, when we hear Arabic, or we hear the word Arab, certain things come up in our mind. We think of these people that look like mixed breed type people, light-skinned mixed breed type people. Those are not the original Arabians. And those are not the true people who first spoke the language of Arabic. The language of Arabic is a beautiful language, and it was our forefathers who first spoke that language. It was our forefathers who first controlled the region of Mecca and that whole region over there. And it's found out that the way you make the connection is this. In the standard history books, they refer to the people as Hyksos who came and conquered Egypt, right? Well, in the Arabic sources, they're known as Amalek. When you look up in the Bible under Amalek or the Amalekites, that was the name given to this confederacy of different peoples, Canaanites, Moabites, so on and so forth. They were given the collective name of Amalek in the Bible, as well as by the Arabic historians, as they were known as Amalek. Now, Amalek, from the word Malik, which means king or rulers, from which you get shepherd kings or foreign rulers. And so what happened was that they came and ruled Egypt as pharaohs. Now, in the Arabic sources, they talk about foreign people or another people coming to Egypt and ruling as the pharaohs. But they don't say anything about Hyksos. They refer to them as the Amalekites. They were the original builders of a civilization in Arabia that you still come up with desert right now. They had massive civilizations there. with land was irrigated. See, prior to 1500 BC, those cataclysms, Sahara Desert was fertile land. You had lakes there, you had agriculture, you had cities there. With their infrared satellites, they can still detect to this day cities underneath the sand in the Sahara Desert. The same thing in the Arabian Desert. There were cities underneath there. That's why when you read the Quran, it talks about these old ancient civilizations that was destroyed in Arabia. It refers to as Ad and Tamil. Ad, A-D, and Tamil. Those were the civilizations of our ancestors before they crossed all the way to Egypt and further to Western North and South Africa. And so here you read, I went and got a hold of the Encyclopedia of Islam from the year 1911, and I looked up Amalek in there, and this is what it said: the Amalekites of the Bible. Muslim historians differ as to the genealogy of Amalek. According to some, he was descended from Lut, according to others from Amshaphat, while others consider him a Hamite or Camite. The Amalek are generally considered to be the remains of one of the most ancient Arab tribes. The present-day Arabs, they know that there was people there before them, and they know that they were our ancestors. It says that the Amalek are generally considered to be the remains of one of the most ancient Arab tribes of the same descent as Tazim, Jadis, and Tamil, which you see in the Quran. It talks about Tamil being destroyed by some type of earth. In the Quran, it says that Allah destroyed Tamil through some type of cataclysm because they wouldn't listen to their prophet. It says that the prophet was sent to these cities and they rebelled against them, and so Allah destroyed them. This all goes back to the cataclysms that I mentioned in 1500 BC that destroyed these cities, Ad, AD, and Tamil. And it says here, the Arabs say, they're talking about the modern day Arabs, say that after the confusion of the tongues, the Tower of Babel, God himself taught Amalek the Arabic language. So here the Arabs saying that there was a people before them who allowed God himself taught the Arabic language. See, so when you hear Arabic and you hear the word Arab or Arabian, cast out that picture in your mind of the people that you're thinking about now. Our ancestors were the original inhabitants of those lands. And as the prophet said, in later years, when your brother came from Asia and the Holy Lands and joined them, they were seeking new homes. Why were they seeking new homes? Because of the cataclysms that took place. Alright? So now let me continue on, because you're going to find that this history is different than what we taught. Like I said, we've been made to believe that we were all brought here from Africa in slave ships. But some of it don't even compute. At that time, they talking about the slavery was happening the way they said. The Moorish Empire controlled the Mediterranean and the Atlantic Ocean. At one time it was referred to as the Red Sea. All the red peasants up in the Red Sea. And I'm going to show you a seal of the original seal for the United States. And it shows Moses standing like this, part of the Red Sea, and the Israelites going through it. And part of that was to symbolize them gaining their freedom from Moorish slavery. See, it's deeper than what you think. We was enslaved because we enslaved them first. And because of that, we suffer from the divine law of retribution of what goes around comes around. That's why we was enslaved. We enslaved the Europeans on a massive scale first. You don't hear too much about this in the schools, but I'm going to show you in their books where it's documented. Alright? So, this is our deed of inheritance, dealing with our heritage that went from Northeast Africa, across the Atlantic Ocean to North, South, Central America and the Caribbean islands. All that was the inheritance of our forefathers. And we inhabited both sides of that. That empire known as the dominions of Amexem, the European Masons secretly referred to it as Atlantis. You hear the stories about Atlantis, the lost continent of Atlantis, the lost civilization of Atlantis? That's code for our ancient civilization. That was on both sides of the Atlantic. But when the cataclysms hit, everything was disrupted. That's when we get the Tower of Babel, the confusion of tongues, because we began to lose communication with one another. And so our science, our religion, our way of life began to develop into dialects because they couldn't communicate. When they say different confusion of tongues, it's not just language per se, But it was the science of our forefathers, our way of life, our religion, that was also broken up into dialects. So that's why you see some cultures, you got Buddhists, you got Hindus, you got, each one of them got a piece of it. Imagine, it's like a mirror that was shattered into many pieces. And these people pick up a piece of it, look, see the reflection in it, and think they got the whole truth. It's been scattered. And so our job as Moors is to go out there and gather all these. That's why the prophet said on our nationality card that we recognize all the great divine prophets, Buddha, Confucius, and so forth, to make us look into these things and gather up these different pieces that's missing. All right? So this is our deed of inheritance, secretly referred to as Atlantis. And so I went and did further research on Atlantis, and I remember some of the, this is taken from Donnelly's book on Atlantis. Now remember, the story of Atlantis came down to us supposedly from Plato, who heard the story from Solon, so-called Greek philosopher, who went to Egypt, and he heard the story from Egyptian priests. The Egyptian priest said that when you go to the Straits of Gibraltar, there was once a massive island there, and it was a whole continent. And that this empire was the greatest empire ever known. And that's how the story came down to us. What you see right here, now remember, here in this hemisphere, it was our ancestors who built the Mayan pyramid civilization that went from Alaska all the way down to Peru. That's why all up and down the Mississippi River, you see pyramids, you see mounds, all up and down the Mississippi River, going into Central America and further down. As a matter of fact, they just recently discovered infrared sensing that underneath the Amazon jungle, there's actually bricks laid out, city streets laid out underneath the jungle. They're like, bro, we thought this jungle was here since infinite time, since dinosaur time. We thought that jungle been here. They're looking down below it, and they see bricks laid out straight, perfect right angles underneath the jungle. Just recently, they just found a city, a sunken city off the coast of Cuba, 2,200 feet below the surface. A half a mile down off the coast of Cuba. And National Geographic tried to buy up all the rights to it. And the Cuban people got upset because of that, so now they out the picture. But they supposed to be sending divers. They see, using underground sensing, they see pyramids down there and everything. In the Caribbean, and those in the Caribbean know about this, you have certain islands where whole chunks of islands just submerged. With just whole parts of it just go underwater, because that area there is very unstable. And so you constantly have land rising and land falling. And that's part of which led to this whole thing about the southern continent of Atlantis. It's all tied in with those geological cataclysms. Now here it ties it right into the mound buildings. Hold on. I'm going to show you this one. The ancestors said that, see, Moor, the word Moor, let me just read this first. All right, here we go. This shows you the connection between Atlantis and America. It says, Plato says that in Atlantis, there was a great and wonderful empire. From what I'm mentioning. Some of the words and terminology is almost the same with what the prophet said, which aggressed wrongfully against the whole of Europe and Asia, thus testifying to the extent of this dominion. When the prophet specifically said dominion of a Mexican, right? Dominion. It not only subjugated Africa as far as Egypt, but remember, the prophet gave that as the most eastern border of our empire. So he said it not only subjugated Africa as far as Egypt and Europe as far as Italy, but it ruled as well across the continent to wit the opposite continent of America, which surrounded the true ocean. Those parts of America over which it ruled were, as we should show here after show, Central America, Peru, and the valley of Mississippi occupied by the mound builders. Those mound builders are our ancestors. That's why when the Europeans came and they see the so-called Indians, there's two peoples here. There's our ancestors, the dark-skinned woolly-haired people, and there's the ones who the elders refer to as the Shemanites, or those of Mongol descent, who you see with the long hair, the sort of chinky eyes, like you see with the Mexicans and some of them now, the stereotypical Indian. Those are the ones who came here at a later date. We were already here. The majority of them came later, around 1200 AD, during the time of Genghis Khan, as fugitives, and they were nomads. We had settled cities and pyramid cities all over the Mississippi. When they came in, they were nomads, and we got into war with them at first. Eventually, We absorb them into us, and that's why you see the different tribes of Algonquin, the different tribes of Iroquois. It's a mixture of us and these other nations that came at a later date, but we were still the dominant nation in this hemisphere. All right? Now, some of the Moors, elders should tell us that the word Moor also means navigator or master navigator of the seven seas of the planet Earth. And it has deeper meaning because it's not only the master navigators of the seven seas of the physical earth, but the master navigators of the seven seas or the seven spiritual seas or the seven chakras, dealing with the seven states of consciousness, master navigators. And just to show you that, just take it from the book Ancient Modern Greatness, when he defined, he gets the word Moor, he talks about how the Moors ruled Britain, Ireland, Scotland, all that was ruled by Moors. It's hard to believe. At one time, we were ruling in England, Ireland, and Scotland, and we had the Europeans enslaved as serfs on the land, and we were the nobles. We made the European serfs pay us a tax, and that's how the word blackmail came about. It was called the Danegeld, or the Danegeld. The original Danes and Vikings were Moors. And the Europeans that you see was the ones that we enslaved to work in the galleys, to row the ships, to row the boats. But the original Danes and Vikings were Moors navigators. And we put them under a tribute that they had to pay to. They called it the tribute to the Black Army, or the Danegeld, or the blackmail. That's where they got the word blackmail came from. All right? It says, dealing with the word Moor, it says here, I'm just going to skip right to here. It says, has succeeded mare. The word mare in the language of Spanish means water or ocean or body of water. Mare, mare, more, mere, all that means the ocean itself. Therefore, if the word Moor in its variations was primarily the sea and gave its name to a nation of sea rovers, navigators, or if the case were reversed and the sea became associated with the name of a great seafaring race, then a much wider vista opens before us. There has been much written about mermen and other water people. That's from which we get the word mermaid or mermaid. All this comes from our ancestors. I'm telling you, this history is so deep. We just beginning to uncover this information now. But I'm not saying this is a European saying this. David McRitchie, Ancient and Modern Britons. All right? And he gets into a whole lot of other stuff here dealing with says of the word Moravi, or you sometimes see Moravian or whatever, define him as being black, swarthy, resembling a Moor. And it just goes on and on. There's a lot in there. But then, two, I found the connection with the maritime people or the sea rovers connected with Atlantis. Remember, the Phoenicians were mass navigators. The Phoenicians were what? Canaanites. All right? Now here it says here, I remember someone else who said that the Moors were ruled by Neptune. I didn't put the connection together, so I found out that Poseidon, who was the god of Atlantis, another name for him was Neptune. And so it began to make sense. It says Poseidon or Neptune is represented in Greek mythology as a sea god, but he is figured as standing in a war chariot drawn by horses. Remember, it was the Hyksos who introduced the war chariot drawn by horses into Egypt. Prior to the Hyksos invasion, there was no war chariots in Egypt drawn by horses. And also the shepherd's crook, they introduced into Egypt also. It says the association of the horse, a land animal, with the sea god is inexplicable, except in the light given by Plato. Poseidon was a sea god because he ruled over a great land in the sea and was the national god of a maritime people. Again, pointing back to our ancestors. This maritime nation that scoured the whole planet, setting up colonies, setting up factories all over the world. The reason why the Phoenicians were so rich is because wherever they went, they found the natural resources of that land and built factories, industrial complexes to mine it and work it. And then they would go to all the great civilizations in the markets and sell it. They were master craftsmen, master traders. That's why you see these Africans coming in now. You see Africans in the street. I see Africans in Manhattan set up a market and 1 minute flat and break it down in 1 minute flat. I mean, like, I'm on 57th Street and 6th Avenue and boom, 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 boom. I mean, they had it laid out, watches, this, that, cocaine, I was like, yo, that's the first time I ever seen somebody set up a market and bring down a market that fast. But that goes back to our ancestry. You got African tribes to this day. They don't understand that you can pick up language like this. I mean, in 2 weeks they can master a whole language. That again goes back to our ancestry. As we was traveling the world, we had this thing in us where we was able to pick up the language of the people immediately. That's why when the Europeans came here, you see men like Esteban Benico, guiding them all through the Southwest. And everywhere he's going, now they say he was a Moor from Morocco. He comes, now how else he's here? They all know him, they like, oh yeah, Esteban Benico, they all know him. He's speaking the language, everything. He's guiding the Europeans through all this, but yet he's from Morocco on the other side of the ocean. You see? So this, you want to say something?
Yeah, the 13th warrior, even though Antonio Banderas' character was Caucasian, depicted a Moor, he picked up the language like that in the movie, if you remember.
Exactly. We had to. We had to, given that we was coming in contact with people from all over the planet. We was a maritime nation. All right? Like I said, truth, we just scratching the surface right now. Truth is stranger than fiction. There's so much to this. This again, when we were, and let me know, we started at 4 o'clock, right? I just got to keep track of the time. All right, so I'm going to go to about maybe 20 after 5 and then we're going to do question and answer. There was a time, see, at the time of the Moorish Empire, at the height of the Moorish Empire, I'm talking about right before 1492, at the height of the Moorish Empire, our technology and our science was so far ahead of the Europeans that they thought it was magic. Whenever they came in contact with the Moors and our high science, they thought it was magic. That's how far advanced our technology. The Europeans themselves said it was 500 years ahead of anything the Europeans had. And so that's why they gave us the name Magi. The word Magi comes from the word magician, because they thought our technology was magic. And I'm going to read you one example of that here. This is, again, taken from the book Ancient and Modern Britons, where he says, oh no, this is something else. This is something else. If I don't, I'm going to get into this thing. Anyway, what I thought this was, there was a quote here which says that the Europeans said that as they came to the border, they seen dragons flying to and fro in the air. They heard thunderous sounds. They seen dragons flying to and fro in the air. You know what that was? That was the Moors coming in ships, launching modern artillery. And so they thought it was magic. So they seeing fire, they seeing stuff flying in the air. They thought it was dragons flying too. They thought it was a whole magical scene. But really, it was just Moorish technology. When you heard the stories about fire-breathing dragons snatching up European women and locking them up in some tower somewhere, those were Moors in scale armor with firearms, which they call fire-breathing dragons.
You think that allude to, what's it called?
Lord of the Rings.
Reign of the
Fire.
The Reign of Fire,
Yeah, with the dragon.
Yeah.
Yep. Sure enough, Moors in scale armor with firearms who used to snatch up these European women and hold them for ransom. And so, like I said, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. Now this year, like I said, we made you believe that we all were here from Africa and slave ships, right? Well, you have accounts, European accounts, of that when the first Europeans landed here, they got into battles on the eastern seaboard of the United States with people that they referred to as interchangeably as Moors and Indians. They use the two terms interchangeably. And so is it any wonder that you see Moors all up down the eastern seaboard who got shit and pop, look just like me and you, who got casinos now, the Wampanoag, all that goes back to our ancestors. So this makes sense. When it says here, in 16, it says that a generation or two before Grote spoke of the Indians there. It says the Englishmen who had colonized the western shores of the Atlantic, talking about America, not more than a generation or two before Grote spoke of the Indians there as being as black as gypsies. In 1676, the native race of New England was spoken of indifferently as Indians and Moors. So wait, the Europeans are coming here and they're engaging in battle with people. Now they come here for the first time now. I'm talking about New England. And they engaged in battle with people who they refer to interchangeably as Indians and Moors. And it says, and our British Indians are also remembered as Moors. What British Indians they talking about referred to as Moors? See, what we have to understand is that the colonization scheme was first perfected, and the reservation system was perfected in Europe first, with our people, where they would take our people who was in England, Ireland, and Scotland, move whole populations to land that they didn't want, and settle their people there. Later on, they came and applied it here in America, but they perfected it first in England with our ancestors. This is where you can story about Highlander and all that stuff like that. The Highlanders were those Moors who retreated into the forest, like the Black Forest in Germany and stuff like that, and were fighting guerrilla warfare, like the Maroons here, against the Europeans. That's where you get the real Highlanders. And then when you see the Scottish with the skirts, with the plaid and all that stuff like that, with the bagpipes, going around, they call them bards, going around singing the history, that's the exact same thing as the Ghana, the griots in Ghana. The plaid is like the kente cloth. Each clan had its own pattern. And they went around, musicians singing the history of the kings and stuff like that. Those are the griots, the same thing. The Druids, if you was to see a Druid who built Stonehenge, he was like a modern day Dogo. The same goatee beard, walking with the same staff, the exact same people. Alright? This is something else I came in contact with so much information that just told, most of this is contained in the journals. This bugged me out here, because this came from totally off the wall. See, you know what happened? This is why I refer to it as the Moorish paradigm. A paradigm is a way of perceiving reality. It's like a model of reality that helps you understand reality. Once you have this paradigm, you're going to see this Moorish stuff everywhere. At first, I couldn't find the information dealing with this. Once I got the paradigm, I could walk in the library blindfolded, grab the first book I touch, and I'll find some of the Moors in there. That's what happened with this book. I was in one section. I used to live in the library. I used to go to the library. I used to get comfortable. I used to take off my shoes, get comfortable. You know, I knew I was going to be in there for a couple hours, so I would just get comfortable. You know what I'm saying? And I was just happened to be in the hour one day, and I grabbed a book, and I came across this. And it's dealing with the island of California. And the book was called The Negro Trailblazers. Now this is deep. Check out what this says. It says, know ye that on the right hand of the Indies, there is an island called California, very near the terrestrial paradise, which is peopled with black women without any men among them, because they were accustomed to live after the fashion of the Amazons. Now this is more science than that whole Amazon thing, right? But going on, it says, they were of strong and hardy bodies, and ardent courage and of great force. The island is the strongest in the world, from its steep rocks and great cliffs. Their arms, their armaments, were all of gold, and so were the comparisons of the wild beasts which they rode after having tamed them, for in all the island there is no other metal but gold. Remember the California gold rush? Well, them sisters had it locked down a long time ago. Alright? Now check this out. This paragraph is what bugged me out. It says, they lived in caves very well worked out of the rocks with much labor, like you see in Arabia, Egypt, where they actually worked out the cave the size of mountains. And it says, they had many ships in which they sailed to other climes to carry on their forays to obtain booty. The various Christian knights assembled to defend the emperor of the Greeks in the city of Constantinople against the attacks of the Turks and the infidels, and on this occasion, the Queen of California and her court entered this war. Now I'm like, hold up. They talking about the crusade, they talking about the period of time where Muhammad II, the conqueror, finally took over Byzantine, Constantinople. But they're saying that here's a queen coming from California who engaged in this war also. Now I'm reading one of the oral statements from the prophet where it says that he mentioned a queen of Chicago who engaged in war with, I think, 5 pharaohs or something like that. And so it just made me think about this, where you have this queen from California entering into the war with ships and everything. Showing you that this whole aspect of this history.
Is that talking about the same California here in the United States?
Right here.
What about
So there's a lot of stuff that we need to uncover. Now this, alright, this goes back to, remember I was telling you about how our technology was so advanced, so far advanced beyond the Europeans that they called us magi, or magicians. And because they thought our technology was magic, but it was so far advanced to them. And again, this is from Ancient Modern Greece, which confirms that. It says that the civilization of the Moors or Saracens contrasted forcibly with the intellectual darkness of Christendom has long been recognized by moderns. And the mere fact that so many of our scientific words are Arabian, such as the words as algebra, alchemy, alembic, elixir, alkali, alcohol, almanac, all these words, when you study the Spanish language, all the words dealing with science, dealing with agriculture, are Arabic. Now remember what I told you about Arabic. Arabic language didn't originate with some people we call Arabs, that we call Arabs now. And remember what I said about the original Arabians. All these scientific words came from our ancestors. All right? Especially these words you see that the word al. All right? Al-Jabal came from the word algebra, came from the word al-Jabal. Al-Kemi. Al-Limit. Il-Itza. Al-Khalai. All these things come from our science. We were master scientists. We were master agriculturalists. I mean, what we did in Spain, when you study more Spain, and the way they developed agriculture, they're the ones who introduced citrus fruits, oranges, tangerines, all that. We were mixing, breeding different combinations, cherries, all that. While the European kings were living in oversized barns with holes in the roof to let the smoke out, the Moors had palaces and libraries with marble floors and walls that had air conditioning, where they had a way of blowing cool air, and not only just cool air, but perfumed air, where they would run the cool air over beds of roses and beds of flowers, so they would sit in libraries, cool, perfumed air blowing over them, with cities with streetlights that ran for miles. I think they said in Toledo, or one city alone, they had over 20,000 bookstores. Bookstores.
She can testify to this. She lived this thing for a while.
All right.
You know, she had
Like me,
Yeah, I lived there for about 2 years, and I remember we used to go on tours, and we saw the different fallen cities, like we went to Italica, we went to Toledo, we were talking about in Granada, and they were talking about how long the Moorish people were there, and they were telling us about the irrigated waterway. I saw them, and I was like, because one of my friends made a comment, she said that, so you need to tell me that 2,000 years ago, they had the technology to have sewer systems and water systems and irrigation systems, and 3,000 years ago, people were dying, or no, 500 years ago, people were dying from a plague because they lived nasty.
Yep. That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
That's what he said. The contracts forcibly with the intellectual darkness of Christendom.
also, it's in the architecture.
Yes.
I was there also, in the south of Spain. It's in the architecture, it's in the music,
That's
it's
right.
in the fashion, it's in the
When
food.
you listen to like the Candeano Bay from the southern part of Spain, and Andalusia, the name of that came is Moorish too.
That's right.
And that when you listen to the music, it sounds exactly, you can't tell, if you don't know Spanish, even if you know Spanish, you don't understand, it sounds exactly like the Arabic music. When you're walking down the streets of Spain, you know how like in Flatbush, you smell the insects?
Right.
Christmas time in Spain is the same way. I was almost that they have that special engine. It doesn't look the same, but it smells
Franklin system,
exactly
yeah.
the same way. And they sing it from like the rooftops or something like that.
Right.
And then it's very strange to see like how, in general, when you think of Spain, you think of European, but Europeans don't consider Spanish people European.
Right.
And Spanish people don't consider themselves really European, only until when they have this whole European Union thing. Until, and maybe that's like the past 5 years, they consider themselves Mediterranean, so
Right.
they don't consider themselves.
Almost like a separate civilization.
Yeah, and they can look as white as whatever, but they don't, to them, wait, they say they call them Caucasian. I don't remember what they call the people from Northern Europe, but they call them by another name, and they're considered by the people from like Britain and Switzerland, Sweden, by as different. And I never thought.
Just like in southern Italy and Sicily.
Yeah.
Where,
And also the bloodline of the Moors is still present
Oh, you can see it.
strongly
You can see
in
it.
southern Spain.
Yeah.
And the Spaniard people, when they read our history, they have a different viewpoint about our history than what we get here from the Europeans here in this country. So they respect us more in Spain than we respect ourselves here in the United States.
See, that's so deep.
I work with the Russian people on my job, and one of them visited Spain over the summer. And I told her the Moors were there, and that's our city. And when she saw Alhambra, she said she's just blown away. She still cannot believe the architecture, the technology.
Still there.
I'm saying I had a friend that he's with the Portuguese embassy, and he grew up in school over there. And he said in school in like Portugal, they teach you that Latin was our language, and we taught the Europeans Latin. So even learning Latin, it goes back to what you just said. He said in school they teach you that the Moors brought Latin into Europe. They didn't have Latin. We brought Latin to them, and that's grade school there.
Some of my Spanish friends, they say that the Moroccans that came from there, that they taught them civilization. That they brought all that technology and all of the architecture. They say, my friends, they my age and they common knowledge. They don't really, but they say that like it's like common.
We walk around here with inferiority. We all inferior, and the ones who know, they know that they're. You know, that's why it's so great. That's why what the prophet brought to us was so important, because he gave us a beautiful motive, the Moorish motive. Moorish, like Moor Science Temple. Moorish means in the style of the Moors, using Moorish motifs. We couldn't, if we wanted to, we couldn't pick a better motive to use. One of the highest civilizations produced on the planet Earth was the Moorish civilization. I'm talking about overall. You know, there's aspects where the technology right now surpassed, the technical stuff may have surpassed them, but I'm talking about overall civilization, standard of living, it hasn't been surpassed today, Moorish Spain. It hasn't been surpassed yet.
In every respect, the Moors dominated Spain for 800 years. And I'm talking about the full spectrum of how life is supposed to function.
That's right.
You name it, science, food, fashion, mathematics, government, for 800 years.
Look how tolerant the Moors was. One of the keystone virtues of the Moorish civilization was our tolerance. The fact that we allowed other Christians, Jews to live, and we protected them. All they did was pay a certain tax, and we protected them from all onslaughts. I mean, those people flourished under the Moors. You see Moors, the Europeans were sending scholars, the Vatican was sending their people to study the Moorish science, secretly. But a lot of times they would keep it secret for themselves and keep their people ignorant, blind, deaf, and dumb so they could rule them. You see what I'm saying? It's so deep. There's so many aspects of this that we can cover. That's why this is just like part one, because it's like, I know there's no way that we're going to cover half the stuff I really want to cover, but it's good to see that y'all are aware of the greatness of the Moors. And now, it's important now that we make the connection on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, that what you see over there in Moorish Spain was going on right here. But what happened was that the Europeans, the Dominican and Franciscan orders, destroyed much of what the Moors had over here. And that which they didn't destroy, they converted into nunneries, monasteries, and churches. That's why when people sometimes say to me, well, if the Moors was doing that stuff over here in this hemisphere, where's the artifacts? Where's the architecture? When you go to Central America, you see it all over the place, but they just changed the facade. They put a cross on top, and it's Moorish.
They did that in Spain. All of the mosques, they changed them to make them Christian, and you can't tell the difference on the outside. But when you go inside, you can see that it looks just like the Alhambra, it looks just like this. And they put the bell tower at the top.
Right.
But you can see like, and they tell the history of the buildings based on, okay, this part was built here, then after that, then they extended with this. When the Christian Empire took over, then they put this on the outside and they covered it. But it's still like there.
That's exactly, now what they did there is exactly what happened right here in America, Central and South America. A lot of the buildings that you see that you think are Catholic churches or whatever, were originally masjids and mosques. And all they did was do this facade. And guess what they got to do this facade? The Moriscos. And matter of fact, they called it Mujahid or Mujahidar art. They actually got Moorish architects to change up the facades itself.
The little Moors.
Right, but the Moriscos were the Moors who they forced to convert to Christianity. land, we walking on our ancestors every day. We're so busy living on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Our ancestors are climbing from the ground right here in North Carolina, right here in New York, saying, what about us right here? That's why sometimes when I walk in the woods here in America, and I'm walking, I'm just fooling with the ancestors, and I can feel that they happy, that they overjoyed the fact that I'm teaching about our Aboriginal inheritance right here. Because the European would love to try and sell us all to Africa or stuff like that and give up our inheritance right here in North South Central America.
But they say it themselves. They still want y'all to go back to Africa.
Look at this. Let me just show a couple of pictures here showing how the artifacts are so prove that this is the land of our ancestors. The first civilization is the Olmec. Look at these faces here. These are some of the oldest artifacts found here, dating back 1,500 to 3,000 years before Christ. Does this look like an Indian as we've been taught Indians look? Yet it was the Olmecs that laid the whole foundation for all great civilization. When you see this calendar, the so-called Mayan calendar and all that, that was laid out by the Olmecs exactly on August 11th, 3113 BC. Because this calendar follows cycle. This particular calendar is going to end in the year 2012. That's why you hear this talk about the year 2012. Now, our brothers and sisters who were here, the Olmecs, our ancestors, they were masters of time calculation. See, because they had the zero. And they also had the place system, the place value system dealing with numbers. So they was able to calculate numbers, unimaginable quantities. And so they actually, they said the world experienced cycles, different cycles, what they call ages or different suns. This particular sun is scheduled to end in the year 2012. Now to show how accurate it was, they said that on that day, I believe it was the winter solstice 2012, they said that the planet Venus will be seen to be going across the diameter of the sun. So I took my astronomical software, my computer, and advanced it that particular day, 2012, and sure enough, I see right on my screen the planet Venus going right across the diameter of the sun. They was making calculations like this thousands of years ago. So accurate.
I think they also have stone computers.
That's exactly. This is originally a stone. This was originally in the form of a stone. As a matter of fact, I got a picture here in the 5th issue because what's interesting, right? In this 5th issue, I talk about the astronaut, the American astronaut Gordon Cooper. He was doing some archaeological digs. And he found stuff, and check out what he says. Here's the stone right here, the calendar. These were actually stone computers, like Stonehenge, the pyramids. All these were actually computers made out of stone, from which we were able to make calculations. It says here, the age of the ruins, this is Gordon Cooper, the American astronaut speaking now. He says the age of the ruins was confirmed 3000 BC. 3000 BC. Compared with other advanced civilizations, relatively little was known about this one called the Olmec. He also says, quote, among other things, the Olmec have been credited with developing writing in Mexico. They also developed the concept of the zero and positional numbers 3,000 years before Europe did. They greatly advanced agricultural practices. They was able to set irrigation. That's one thing that our people mastered was the science of irrigation. To bring water from places where there was water to places where there was no water, that was a master science.
They used to bring it 10 miles in. In Spain, they showed where the maps and stuff. They brought it 10 miles in. So they tried to create where the dry areas of the river down there.
Gardens.
They created all these gardens, and they had the people being able to eat they were starving to death. And they made these. I'm serious. And they made these irrigation things that were 10 miles into the place, and it looked like oasis because in the middle of desert, it's people.
Green part right there.
Yeah, but this is and they got thrown out 800 years ago.
And what happened to Spain after they threw them out?
It went to garbage.
And still haven't recovered. And still haven't recovered. To this day, it still haven't recovered.
I would just like to commend the young sister here. I'm impressed with her command and perspective of our history because the sisters are nurturers and they're on the front line as far as teaching this information to our posterity. So I just want to commend the young sister for
I do also, because it's good. I I feel good when I see the sisters getting involved in, like I believe with our Bible said that you teach a man, you teach an individual, you teach a woman, you teach a nation.
That's right.
Because through her womb comes the nation. So when the sisters get this, it's all over.
You can recognize a nation by the position of the women.
That's right. That's right.
So this sister, I commend you.
I commend you too, my sister.
You know, brother, I just want to say one thing. With respect to the water situation, even Babylon was probably even more fabulous with that.
Oh, man. That was our master science. I mean, even the dam that they found in Arabia.
Right.
I mean, that was one of our master sciences that allowed us to sustain massive populations and do the great things that we did.
Right.
It's all based on water and agriculture.
3 of the 7 wonders of the world were Babylon itself, the hanging gardens, and then the river in between.
That's right. That's a massive. Some of those irrigation systems are even more masterful than even the pyramids and the other structure that was built, was the irrigation systems. Particularly knowing it says that they greatly advanced agricultural practices, and it's no wonder that the Europeans enslaved us mainly for agriculture. You notice he wasn't a slave to the so-called nomadic Indians and so on and so forth. We was the ones who possessed that master knowledge, that so-called green thumb. That's when you look at men like George Washington Carver. He was one of the greatest scientists that ever lived. He was an alchemist. See, people think he just took a bunch of peanuts and was mashing them up, making peanut butter, peanut juice, and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't about that. He was actually breaking down the molecular structure of the peanut and then recompiling it into different things. He was making plastics. He was making wires. He was making all kinds of things.
Paint, oils.
And also one of the things I read about him, he was also able to speak to plants.
That's right. You hear about Dr. Doolittle? That's how he communicated with the plant.
That's how he got a lot of his information.
That's how he got his information. There was a thing I did here. I forgot what issue it was.
He also said about George Washington Carver that he discovered a color of blue
Yes.
that was lost,
Unfadable.
that was unfadable, and it was the only color that matched a color of blue that was found in one of the temples in Kemet.
Dealing with the ancient Phoenicians. Matter of fact, one of the word phoenix or phoenix refers to the purple or the royal blue that they got from certain shells called morex. That they would get from a certain shell called morex. That's part of how they got their name. And he's 100% correct that he came up with this particular dye. So much of this stuff was packed. They had invited him to Washington, D.C. to speak before Congress, all this stuff. And when he got off the plane, they referred to him, they said he looked like an Egyptian pharaoh. That's how they referred to him when he got off the plane. And they were just totally flabbergasted. They was totally laid out with this man, what he was able to produce. And see, why did he choose the peanut? Because the peanut was able to grow in even the most porous soil. You was able to grow the peanut. He showed how just from that one crop, farmers who were suffering, who couldn't make ends meet, just by growing that peanut and then taking and converting to all those different products, that they could make a good living. So I mean, what he did was on a level of massive discoveries dealing with civilization, what this man did. I mean, I'm going to study him much more deep. I plan to do a whole article and everything with him in one of my issues because that man was great. He was a great man, and he did some things that was totally, but dealing with the whole thing of talking to plants, I always used to wonder because I started studying herbology with Rudy Duckett, but You Know Hakim Bey, the one who produced the wood root tonic, and he used to take me out of the woods and show me the plants and everything. And I thought to myself one day, I said, how did our ancestors, out of all the thousands of species, millions of species of plants, how did they ever discover that this was for this was good for this was good for that, right? I came across a book called The Cosmic Serpent by Narvi. It was deep. I did a write-up. I don't know what issue I did it in, but it deals with these shamans who would take these hallucinogenic plants. Now, they asked the shamans, how do y'all know this plant's for this plant's for that, this plant's for this? They said that the plants told them. They said the plants told them what they were for. They were like, well, wait a minute, what do you mean the plants told y'all? How did the plants tell y'all this? Well, what happened was that they would take this particular hallucinogenic brew of different plants. This one famous one called ayahuasca, right? Now, the thing that was deep about this ayahuasca brew was that in it, there was a chemical in it called DMT. And I did a whole write-up on DMT too. There's so much stuff, but there's a write-up on DMT. DMT is an enzyme in the stomach that if you take the plant that has DMT in it, the DMT produces hallucination. It takes you into a whole other different time dimension, a whole other time and space dimension. But what happens is that if you take the plant that has DMT in it, the enzyme in the stomach destroys the DMT. So they actually found, the shamans actually found another plant that they combine with that plant that actually destroys, inhibits the enzyme so that they can take up the DMT. The scientists are like, wait, how do they know about this? How do they know out of all these millions of plants in the Amazon to combine this plant with this plant in the right proportions, knowing that one would inhibit the enzymes in the stomach? I mean, they couldn't understand it. And they told them, the plant told us. And what happened was that what this guy Narvi found out in that book, Cosmic Serpent, was that they kept talking about, the plants would tell them, they kept talking, they have these visions of these serpents that would speak to them and tell them these different things. It almost sounded like to go on to Eden while the serpent speaking, right? But check out the significance. Guess what was happening? When they would take these hallucinogenic plants, it was bringing their consciousness down to the biomolecular level where it was actually communicating with DNA strands. Those are the serpents. Yeah, the serpents that you see twined like that. These serpents. And this was a word, all right. It's bringing their consciousness down to, when you look at some of the drawings of the shamans, it looks exactly like DNA under the microscope. Almost exactly. When they would go on these trips, they would do paintings and stuff like that. The paintings looked exactly how, if they were studying biology and studying cellular cells and stuff like that, and DNA, it looked exactly the same way.
So like the double helix?
Exactly. That's why they call it the cosmic serpent. And I've got a picture in there where I show the Egyptian pharaohs, a scene where you see the serpent spitting right into the pineal gland. What was happening? They said, how was the serpent communicating with them? Check it out. They found out that DNA emits light photons and laser pulses. It emits laser pulses, light photons and laser pulses. And that's how one DNA communicates with other DNA. So that's why sometimes we may walk into a room and meet a person and say, that person gave me a funny vibe. That's actually that person's DNA communicating with your DNA. And so if you in tune with yourself, you pick up right up and say, that person gave me a funny vibe. Or you even walk into a room where somebody may have been with a funny vibe and pick up on it as a result of the residue of photons left in the room. I said, we're deep in it, you know? And so when I see that picture of the Egyptian pharaoh standing and the serpent spitting like the light photons right into the pineal gland, remember that the pineal gland is what? Light sensitive.
He understood all of that.
You know, it gets deep. Anyway, let me finish showing y'all this. Here's got some more pictures of the Olmecs. Now, does that look like an Indian? There's no doubt. And it says Leroy Olmec sculpture from Jade, 1150 BC. And what I also found out was that the Olmec civilization is the same as the Shang dynasty, the Shang civilization in China.
Yes.
And also the Jomon culture in Japan. And they all say that there was these black rulers that ruled in China as well as Japan. The Japanese said that when they first entered Japan, they had to get rid of the black dragons, or the black devils, or the black dragons they referred to them as.
Wow. I'm also finding out from certain books I'm reading now that the quote-unquote older Indians were also Hebrew Israelites.
Right, well, see now you gotta understand the Hebrew Israelite now thing, right? And I got into that in the 12th issue, what was it, the 11th issue and the 12th issue also, is that you'll find that there's a very close, as a matter of fact, you might as well say identical relationship between one known as Hebrews and the Canaanites. The religion, the people, and what you'll find out is that the ones referred to as Hebrew is a branch of the Canaanites that was chosen for a specific reason. So, whereas you could say the Moorish Empire was the umbrella nationality, within that you had many sub-nationalities. Because remember, it was called the Moorish Empire. You see what I'm saying? You may have a king of a nation, but an emperor is a king of kings. under him are many nations, are many kings. It's an empire made of many nations. So within that, you have sub-nationalities of which people was one. You have many other sub-nationalities. You have Moabites, you have Canaanites, you have Hittites, you have Amorites, you have many different tribes. You see what I'm saying? And so for us, it's hard for us now just to identify with just one per se. We got the blood of all those sub-nationalities flowing through our veins. We may choose to just identify with one. Well, right, but that's why the prophet, knowing that it was so much mission, it was almost impossible. It's like trying to untangle a locked up piece of head. You can't untangle it. So he just gave us the whole picture saying, your Moorish nationality, that's the umbrella that involves everybody. That takes everybody into the wing. You see what I'm saying? Here, this is a mound builder here. This was found at Columbus, Ohio. A mound builder. Going back to the mound builders. All right, I'm just going to run through some things quick because I want to say something, time for some questions and answer some more comments. Here again, Olmec head. And this Olmec head, you can find a replica of this in the Museum of Natural History on 81st Street. And I remember one time I had a mind woman speaking there, and I asked, I said, well, what's the connection between our people and this hemisphere? And she says, well, I just know that the people were over here slaves. I said, what? I said, what about that big head sitting in the room right next door? She goes, oh, I don't have too much knowledge about that. Well, wait, you call yourself a Mayan scholar, but you don't have too much knowledge about this? See, this is the game that's played. Right, some of the ones, quote unquote, called Indians play this game. Trying to say that they the true aboriginals and we some slaves that went in and tried to mix with them type of game, and then for that, the federal government recognized them under this designation of Indian and gives them some little reservations, some stuff here and there, that type of game.
A brother mentioned the other day that when the Europeans came over here, they was about the red skin, that the definition of red to them was brown. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't even those people, but brown people is symbolic, but they said red, because they never had the color red in their country. Right. It was just brown.
And if you look at most of our people here in this hemisphere, most of us got a reddish-brownish skin. It's reddish-brownish tinge. You see what I'm saying? Even though we got a whole range of color, but a lot of us from right here has that reddish-brownish skin. That's also connected with the word Phoenician or Phoenix also. All right, here's another head here. And you can see there's no doubt. I mean, I never seen an Indian that was like this so-called stereotypical Indian. I never seen an Indian with lips like that. Now you see some of the Mexicans that are intermixture with us. Remember, because the Mexicans that you see coming up here now are a mixture between us and the ones with the Mongols. Remember, when those ones came here, we mixed with them. When we engaged in warfare, we would take prisoners of war and we would absorb them into the tribe. That's where they got that whole thing called running the gauntlet. What happened is that the men of the tribe were standing their legs like this, and the prisoner they took from the other tribe had to run through, and they were in the beat down. When they came to the other side, they was part of the tribe at that point. And so that's what happened. That's why you see in the later date, you see the Iroquois Confederacy, you see a lot of white-looking people in the Iroquois Confederacy. Grant and all that stuff like that. That was because, why? The Iroquois Confederacy was involved with war against the Europeans. And so they was absorbing vast amounts. They was taking crazy captives. There was a book called White Captivity that just dealt not with the white captives that was taken to Morocco, but the white captives that was taken by the Iroquois Confederacy. Taken by right here in this hemisphere. And they absorbed all of them. That's why you got these people walking around here that just look like white people with long hair. They call them some Indians.
How does Albert Pike fit in there? That's the always the one.
Albert Pike? You talking about dealing with
he's supposed to be the leader of that Confederacy, what I'm saying.
Yeah, that gets deep. I want to say that for another thing, but that gets into a whole thing. I'm going to touch on somewhat of dealing with masonry if I get a chance. I'm going to try to run through it quick so I can get to that also, but I'm going to touch on that. Again, some more pictures. Y'all don't look like no Indian to me, as we've been taught, stereotypical Indian. You can see that, no doubt, that's a brother. Here again, no doubt. Absolutely no doubt.
They try to tell Jose Clemente Bay that that bottom one there, the real dark one, was an adaptation of a lion's head.
That's foolishness. You know what I'm saying? They're trying, and you know what they were trying to say with these massive stone heads? They was trying to say that, all right, y'all guys, the Phoenicians did come here, but those were the slaves of the Phoenicians. Now why would and tribute to their slaves. I mean, stuff they come up, they know that wouldn't make sense. You know what I'm saying? But they come up with anything to try and throw us off.
Brother, on my reservation in Long Island in Brentwood, they have Indians that look just like that.
Yep.
Just like that. I've been on it twice.
Seneca, all that stuff going on out there.
They look just like that. Look just like you and me.
That's right.
Indians.
They classified as Indians, but they're Moors. They're nationalized Moors. And the reason why, see, the importance of the prophet tying us in with our nationality as being Moor or Moorish is because if I was to come up to you and say, brother or sister, how do you identify yourself? If you told me black or African, I said, well, boy, all right, let's look at black. Black is an adjective that describes a thing. It does not identify a thing. And Moors, we're scientists. That's an inaccurate description at that because you're not black, you're brown, or various shades of brown. So if I ask you how you identify yourself, you told me black, I'll say, nope. Because first of all, that's inaccurate. Second of all, that does not identify you. That's an inaccurate description of you. You tell me you're African. Well, there's no nation called Africa. Africa is a continent made up of many nations. Each one of those nations has their own flag, their own historical continuity, so on and so forth. So that don't work. We say more because that ties you into a whole historical legacy with international treaties, everything, a flag, and a nation that's recognized by nations around the world. So that is the importance that the prophet said in declaring your more by tying you back into the ways, into the heritage of your forefather. There's treaties involved. We're going to get to the treaties in a minute. Let me, matter of fact, let me kind of skip up to that because time is run out a little bit. I'm just going to flash some stuff at you that I can't really go deep into, but I just want you to see it. All right? In the Grand Canyon, they found all kinds of Egyptian rock-cut tombs, hieroglyphics, artifacts, all in the Grand Canyon. And what they did was section all those sections of the Grand Canyon and said, it's too dangerous for tourists to go there. They don't want you to know your history.
You mean Lower Egypt?
Right, exactly.
That's what you mean.
Exactly. Now, this made me think also, dealing with those rock-cut tombs, oftentimes we would rock-cut tombs into rocks. And that made me realize that was part of our banking system. Remember they used to bury all this gold and stuff in there with these burials and just seal it? The ancestral priest who was involved with that, they was also the bankers of the nation. When the king or the ruler had to make a withdrawal, he had to go to the ancestral priest who would break the seal and withdraw some of the funds. You see, so that made me realize that on a deeper level. And see, this is what we got to do. We can't just go, when we study this information, we can't just take it as is, but that's where we got to use our creative genius and take it, go level beyond what we just get it as. You know, start thinking about saying, wait, let me just visualize this time and what's going on. They dig these tombs. That was our banks. That was our banking system. All right? Continuing on real quick. Here in the hemisphere, they found Moors, bezos, turbans, everything. All this is from here, Central America. There's no doubt. You can see the ritual scarification of the face, just like they do in West Africa to this day. All that's right here. All right? Here you got sisters with turbans on. The big earrings that you see the sisters wearing at one time. All that, nothing you understand. Here's a brother who's a gymnastic. You see with an afro. Now come on, what's that? That's a lion too? You know what I'm saying? I mean, come on. There's no doubt. Some of these sisters might be like sisters from the Moor Science Temple with turbans. All right? This was interesting also, and this will show you how much work we got to be done. It says, in the high civilization of ancient America from Mexico to Peru, the state organized citizens for the building of massive pyramids, temples, and palaces. The sheer tonnage of earth removed and rock transported and carved of bricks dried in the sun never fails to astound the observer. In Mexico alone, there may be as many as 100,000 pyramids still waiting to be uncovered. Not 10, not 100, 100,000 pyramids in Mexico alone waiting to be uncovered. So, if people think there's no more stuff to be discovered by archaeologists and stuff, we wrong. We got to begin building our own archaeologists to these places. That's just in Mexico. Where's the largest documented pyramid on the planet Earth? Not Egypt. pyramid in Mexico, it has 4 times the value of the pyramid in Egypt. If you took the one in Egypt and turned it upside down and filled it with water, you took the one in Mexico upside down and filled it with water, it will hold 4 times more water. All right, so keep that in mind. And they also found pyramids in China that may be even larger, but the Chinese government denies the existence of it. Now you would think, well, why would the Chinese government, if they have pyramids larger than the one in Egypt, why would they deny something like that? Because they know it was built by your ancestors. And it's not time yet to pull that seal off yet. All the truth's gonna come out soon one day, but it's up to us to force them to pull off those seals.
I don't know about the one in China, but I know that the one in the Mayans have and the one in Egypt are in alignment, from what I understand.
Yeah, oh yeah. All these different things line up, but that goes back to that pyramid university system. And Benjamin Banneker, whose true name is Ben Bey Emmanuel Ali, which I'm gonna get to in a minute if I can, he set up Washington D.C. based on that ancient science. All right. Let me just see if I can skim through some stuff real quick. Let's get that. A lot of stuff I want to talk about. I'm going to get into that another time.
You got time, brother.
Yeah. I'm trying to get everything on that tape a certain way so that it can be packaged properly. Let me show you this. This is interesting too. This is taken from Columbus's journal. It says, on November 2nd, Columbus decided to send Rodrigo de Xeres and Luis de Torres, who had lived with the Adam and Tyler of Murcia and was a Jew and knew Hebrew and Chaldaic and some Arabic, to see the king of Cuba in order to present the letters and to find out all that was necessary. Naturally, a man who knew Arabic and another who knew Guinea, as we had heard before, were especially adapted to hold converse with the kings of the Indies. It's telling you right there, the kings of the Indies, the West Indies, can speak Arabic. And here's Columbus sending Arabic interpreters to communicate with them. What's that telling you? They're telling you right there, they're Moors. There's no doubt. Now, on the eastern seaboard of the United States, as the tribe of the eastern seaboard was being displaced by the European settlers, our brothers and sisters in the Midwest said, well, y'all can pick up and come join us out here. So there was a mass migration where a lot of the ones on the eastern seaboard picked up and began to travel to the Midwest, and that's what they call themselves. Now, these are so-called Indians. Delawares, Nanticoats, so on and so forth, and they call themselves the Ben Ishmael tribe. Indians, and then when they get to the Midwest, they set up a migration route that takes them from places that they call Morocco, Muhammad, and Mecca. And the Europeans say to this day, in these locations are found some of the most oldest black ghettos in those states. The Ben Ishmael tribe. This tribe was deep. Now, the government waged genocide on the Ben Ishmael. As a matter of fact, Hitler studied the American genocide plan that was waged on the Ben Ishmael and implemented that with the Jews. He studied it with the Americans first.
It's called eugenics.
Exactly, eugenics. And they developed it, they perfected it with the Ben Ishmael. You know, taking the men, putting them in jails, taking the children, putting them in orphanages. That's, as a matter of fact, they said Orphan Annie was the Ben Ishmael. Orphan Annie with the little curly afro. Yeah. She was the Ben Ishmael. You know, and like I said, truth is stranger than fiction. All right? Now, wherever we travel on the planet Earth, we always carry the same place name, wherever we settle. So that's why here in America, you got place names like, and these still exist to this day, Atlantis on the eastern seaboard, Turkey, you got Morocco, you got Tunis, you got Tripoli, you got Moab, you got Sudan, you got Cairo, you got Mecca, Morocco, all that goes back to the Ben Ishmael. All right? So wherever we went, you'll find the same place names all over the world. All right?
Where's this map taken from?
This map, somebody gave this to me on 121st Street. You know, see, since I started doing this research, I almost became like a central clearinghouse. People sending me stuff from all over the world. I mean, and I go to my P.O. box, brother, check out what I just found. So what I try to do is, people give me this information, I try to give them credit. You see, I'll say in there, brother so-and-so sent me this, or sister so-and-so gave me this, or whatever, trying to give them credit for the research, because one of us just can't do it. All of us got to contribute to it. And I want to say this, if any of y'all find any good information, send it to P.O. Box 980, Baychester Station, B-A-Y, Baychester Station, Bronx, New York, 10469. Include your name and stuff like that, so I can give you credit for it. All right?
You say that again?
P.O. Box 980, Baychester Station, B-A-Y Chester, one word, Baychester. Soon we're gonna make it Bay, B-E-Y Chester, Baychester Station. You know what I'm saying? It might as well be, as a matter of fact, because they know the Bay is all up in there. Baychester Station, Bronx, New York, 10469. Send your research there, get it published, and we give you the credit for it.
I just wanted to say, they didn't put on the map, but I was in New Orleans earlier, and New Orleans, they call New Orleans the Crescent City.
Oh yeah.
Just south of New Orleans is the city Algiers.
Right. But I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think even, do the police
The
have
police have the crescent moon and the star on their cars, and I was like,
and the badge or something? Yeah. I tell you, Trooper Strange, you see some of the weirdest things. All right, let me just get to this real quick. More. But Dwayne, what is the time to say on that?
It's 1:30.
1:30?
Yeah.
Good, you got a good half hour. Good. All right, let me touch on a little bit of this. I want to get to some of the aspects of America, the behind the scenes stuff. And I'm going to take it back to, I'm going to start with Sir Francis Bacon, because this is a very interesting man. And you can see, first of all, you can see that the original Francis Bacon, you see he's mixed. He's mixed. You can see what people refer to as Tony Moore, or Macho, or whatever you want to call him. Now this is interesting. Let's take it from a stamp. Newfoundland postage, and it says, Lord Bacon, the guiding spirit in the colonization scheme. What are you talking about? Who is this man, Sir Francis Bacon? Sir Francis Bacon was the head of a secret society that he put together. This secret society is what later became known as the Rosicrucians. Now, this secret society also used the pen name of Shakespeare. They used Shakespeare as their pen name. Meaning that all those works that you see that was attributed to Shakespeare, Shakespeare didn't write that. Shakespeare was just an actor in the Globe Theater. He was illiterate. He could barely even write his name. There's no way he compiled those works. Sir Francis in this secret society studied more science. And he secretly embedded certain things in the works of Shakespeare. Because at that time, it was during the time of the Spanish Inquisition. It would have been burned alive if it was found out that it was studying more science. All right? Now, in the story of the founder of the Rosicrucian order, Sir Christian Rosicrucian, so-called, travels to Cairo, Egypt, then goes to Fez, Morocco, and then goes to Spain. And then comes back and sets up the Rosicrucian order. Well, this man who they call Sir Christian Rosicrucian is in reality Sir Francis Bacon, who traveled to those lands, started learning more science, and when he got back, he realized how ignorant his people was. He really realized how they was in darkness. And so he proceeded to try and put together a method, a means by which to raise them to a high level, to bring them up to the standard of the Moors. And so he put together the secret society, and they was the ones who developed the speculative lodge of Freemasonry. See, you have operative masonry, and you have speculative masonry. The operative masons was the ones that was actually going throughout Europe, building cathedrals and so on and so forth. You see what I'm saying? The Gothic cathedrals, which they learned from the Moors. The North African architects is one of the orders that they used to call it. Later on, Sir Francis Bacon's secret society developed the speculative Freemasonry, or the Blue Lodge, where they took the same words, terminology of operative masonry and gave it whole nother connotations to a higher science. All right? He was also the keeper of the Great Seal for the King of England at that time, who was King James I. So now you hear about the King James Version of the Bible. Well, guess who King James commissioned to oversee the translation? Sir Francis Bacon. He was the one who was commissioned to oversee it. Now, check out what they did. Remember I said that they used the pen name of Shakespeare, right? Well, when you go home, and I have it here in the second issue, when you go home, look at your King James Version of the Bible, right? And go to Psalm 46, and count 46 words down, and you'll see the word shake, and count 46 words up, and you'll see the word spare. Shakespeare. Now, is it a coincidence in the King James Bible? You go to Psalm 46, count 46 words down, and see shake, and 46 words up, and see spare? It's not a coincidence. And that's the very center of the Bible. So right in the very middle they encoded their name because Sir Francis Bacon was the master of code and cipher. That's why some of them may sound logical. You see compass and square, because in the original translation of the King James Version of the Bible, there were certain words lined up, like the crossword puzzles. Certain words were lined up certain ways, and so with your compass and square, you could line up the words and get the true deeper meaning that was embedded in it. But once they began translating it over and over again, the words didn't line up no more. So the King James Version you have now, you can't do that. But with the original manuscripts, there was even more messages encoded in there. Somebody want to say something?
Yeah, also, if you count back 46 years to the supposed date of Shakespeare, that 46 years ago was supposed to be his supposed birth. So it was supposed to be his 46th year on earth.
All encoded.
You can never find the word shake or spirit in any other Bible written.
No other Bible
exists in the King
Only
James
that
Version.
So I'm saying that to say that there was something going on. And see, the Moors was also responsible for the Renaissance in Europe. When you hear about the Renaissance, they say the so-called rebirth of Greek and classical culture, all that stuff like that, really them coming into the light of knowledge, that was a secret operation of the Moors as well. One of the themes that symbolizes the Renaissance, what they call the theme of Arcadia, which showed a fountain that was so-called fed by an underground stream. That fountain symbolizes the Moors' knowledge coming into the darkness of Europe through an underground stream of teachers and enlightenments. That's where that whole theme of Arcadia, and that's why the Moors were responsible for the whole Renaissance. Now, Sir Francis Bacon also perfected the colonization scheme. Remember I told you how in England and so forth, they was taking Moors, moving them off their land, and settling their people there, and putting those Moors on reservations. One of those reservations was called Moray. M-O-R-A-Y. And so he perfected the colonization scheme for them in England before implementing it here. And encapsulated that in the works of Shakespeare also, like when you read The Tempest, they talk about how they were in the Caribbean. There was all this, that's when it was in the Caribbean, and it was forced to land on the island of Bermuda. Is all embedded in the Shakespeare work called The Tempest. So right in there, you got Othello, you got all kinds of stuff embedded within the works of Shakespeare, because if he couldn't put it out openly, it would have been killed by the Inquisition. All right? And so the last book he wrote, remember I talked about the connection between Atlantis and America earlier. The last book that was published after he died, but he didn't actually die. His death was faked. And he went to Germany under the name of Lord Verlag. And he continued to do his work for the Rosicrucians under that assumed name. So they faked his death. But after they faked his death, they published one of his works, and guess what it's called? The New Atlantis. In the New Atlantis, he lays out the whole blueprint for the speculative logic masonry, as well as the settlement of America. He connects Atlantis with America, and in there he called the lodge Solomon's House. And you know the whole thing, and the masonry is dealing with the rebuilding of Solomon's temple. So when he secretly refers to it as Solomon's House, he lays the whole thing out in the New Atlantis, which they published after they faked his death, but it would have been too obvious if they would have published it while he was alive. All right? So this is a man who played a very key role in America. And all throughout America, see, that's why we got to think. The prophet told us about that. This is ours. We set up this government. We set this whole thing up. We're not supposed to look at America as being something, that we're supposed to fight against. America's origin is divine. Even though it's shrouded in mystery, it's divine. The reason why it's shrouded in mystery is because the Moors' foundations of it had to be hidden. Even when you look, here's a thing taken from the Journal of the Proceedings of the Continental Congress, and you see all the hands of the states, and what do you see sitting on top of it? Feds. You see the red feds. And if you see this, this picture's kind of clear. September 5th, 1774, and here you see all the hands, all in unity, holding like a pole, or a pillar, and on top of the pillar, what do you see? The feds. And there's another name they should refer to the feds, that's the soft form of the feds. You have the stiff form, you have the soft form, which is called the Phrygian cap, or the Liberty cap. And you see this Liberty cap form of the feds on the army. When you look up in the army, you see their seal, you see it on there. Look it up for New Jersey, you see the feds on top of that. Look up El Salvador, look up these different countries, look up Haiti, you see the feds on top, you see the feds everywhere.
So the New York State flag.
On New York State flag. When I get a chance, I'm going to publish all the different places where you can find this feds, on all the different seals and coats of arms where you see this feds. Like I said, there's a secret Moorish undercurrent behind the whole thing. The original Continental Congress was Moors. And remember, they submitted their Declaration of Independence to the Continental Congress, right, for approval. The first time we didn't approve it. It was not until the second time that we approved it. We allowed them to set up on the eastern seaboard of the United States. You see what I'm saying? That's why in the Continental Congress, there was over 200 letters between the Continental Congress and the Emperor Morocco. Over 200 letters going back and forth. And as you're going to see in a minute, you'll see there was a treaty. Again, symbolizing the behind the scene current. Here you see a man, the true portrait of an unknown man, taken from a series of works that was published called The Letters of Junius. And this is so-called the one who published it, knows they got his face hidden. These were Moors who were working behind the scenes to put this whole thing together. That's why you look at a $2 bill. You see a brother in there, right? You see in the midst of $2 bill, you see a brother in there. This is a motive. See, a lot of times you see a European standing up front, and you see a Moor in the background like this or whatever, right? That motive was for those who knew, understood that Moor in the background, that he was the teacher. He was the tutor, and that was the student, his European student up front. Here you see right here, you have a picture of Peter the Great with one of his Negro favorites. So you see Peter the Great in the front, you see a brother in the background there, right? These brothers was the one who was training these Europeans, just like Angelo Solomon, who was the master mason of the lodge that Beethoven and Bach was members of. Here again, you see the same motif again. You got Lafayette, and here you got the brother in the background. You got the Europeans in the front. You got the brother in the background again, right? Check out this one. Here you got George Washington, and you got a brother in the back with a turban on, named Prince Whipple. Who's this Prince Whipple? With a turban on, with a feather, just like the prophet. Remember the picture I showed you the prophet? I tell you, truth is stranger than fiction. Here's the prophet. See with a turban, the feather coming out, right? Here you see George Washington, Prince Whipple in the background, a turban on, and the feather coming out. Truth is stranger than fiction.
Where did that come from?
This came from a book called The Negro in Colonial Times. And actually, in the issues of the journals, in the back of each one, I got 104 recommended book lists. 100 books listed. It's listed in here. It's listed in here, but it's
Benjamin Quarles.
it's listed right now. Well, it's in here. It's definitely in here.
Does this book contain other pictures of Negroes?
It has other pictures, and it also has, like for instance, see that whole thing about us being taken from Africa as slaves, that whole lie was concocted really to justify their fugitive slave law acts, where they were snatching up free brothers and sisters over here, saying, oh, you escaped slave that we brought over there in Africa. That was the game that was played. So in that book is actually a petition of free brothers from here saying that we disagree with this fugitive slave law act because y'all snatching up free brothers and sisters. Brother could be riding down this canoe here, y'all snatching him up, saying he's an escaped slave from Africa when he was born right here and he's free. So that game was played to justify snatching up. See, what it was doing was enslaving brothers and sisters from right here and then shift them to different parts of America. They were snatching a brother in the Caribbean and send them to America. Send a brother from America, send them to the Caribbean. Right here, see, they tell you about this triangular trade from Africa to the Caribbean to America. But knock off the African thing, and all they was doing was shifting brothers back and forth from America to the Caribbean. See, it's a game, but by the time they got here, you're assuming that they done got them. The brothers coming up here, or sisters coming up here from the Caribbean, they sell them on the slave markets. Assuming or putting forth the lie that He's not just a free brother sister that was already aboriginal here from the Caribbean, but he was brought to the Caribbean from Africa and then sent from here. You see what I'm saying? So it was a game that was played. It was a game that was played for their interest. Why did they have to get you out your original name? All right, let me get into that part now. There was a reason why they had to get you out your original name. It goes back to the treaties. See, a lot of people don't realize that the first treaty signed by this nation, I'm about to throw everything out of order here, but I guess I got you. See, there's a lot to this. The first treaty ever signed by America was the Moroccan Treaty of Peace and Friendship of 1787. Still in force to this day. Morocco 1787. Concluded, ratified by the Continental Congress July 18, 1787. U.S. United States, you mentioned His Majesty from Morocco, boom, boom, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and so forth. The first treaty signed. We were the first ones to recognize this. Why? Because it was our forefathers who set it up. And we were supposed to work together. That's why on the dollar bill you got two seals. This is the only nation with a two-sided seal. Two seals symbolizing two nations. Two seals symbolizing two nations. The one with the pyramid in the eye, that's the seal of our forefathers, of the Continental Congress that we had in this hemisphere before the Europeans came here. And this is the seal of the 6 European tribes that we allowed to set up on the eastern seaboard. 2 and 1. That's why it says E pluribus unum. Out of many different peoples and nations, one. And that's why above our seal, it says annuit coeptus, which means he had favored our undertaking. Meaning it was our government that allowed them to set up their government, that put the stamp of approval. And here you got the stamp of approval date right below the seal, 1776. All right? Now, look at it carefully. Look at the seal. And like the brother said, for the time, the shadow's off on here, the way they got the shadow in on here. It's been known for a long time, but there's a reason why that shadow's off. Because if you take it now, you flip it upside down, you got what? Circle 7. Here's the 7, and there's the circle. So remember I showed you the seal on the Moor Science Temple Quran? You have it right here on the seal, right on the dollar bill. Circle 7. Alright? And that's the seal of our people in this hemisphere. Two-sided seal. Alright? Now, let me step back for a minute. I know I'm throwing everything on the board here, but I got you. Now, some of us may say, well, you say we Moors now. How do we know that they recognize us as Moors back then, or the Moors back then were us, our people, so-called dark-skinned, woolly-haired people, right? How do we know that? Well, I know y'all heard of Dred Scott before, right? The famous Dred Scott case. Well, in that case, most of us check out, the opinion that was handed down against Dred Scott. But not too many of us check out what Montgomery Blair, who was Dred Scott's attorney, said in his defense of Dred Scott. One of the things he mentioned in here, how he was trying to show and prove how our people were part and parcel of the nation that was made here. And look what he used as an example to show that we were part and parcel. It says here, he references, he says here, these considerations will authorize the conclusion that the framers of the Constitution and the parties of that era regarded this class of persons, our ancestors, as citizens and included them in that character in the provisions of the Constitution. And this is fully confirmed by reference to the laws and reference of that day where it says, thus, an act was passed in Massachusetts on 6th of March 1788 forbidding any Negro not a subject of the Emperor of Morocco or a citizen of the United States from carrying in the Commonwealth. So he's putting forth argument saying that these people, that they were included as citizens of the nation at the founding of the Constitution. And as an example to prove that, he references an act that was passed in Massachusetts saying any brother who's not a Moor cannot even tarry within the Commonwealth, cannot even stay here. So if you had any delusions that it wasn't referring to us, that property wasn't the Moors that they're talking to. What more proof do you need right here? From the Dred Scott case. From the Dred Scott case, he's saying it right there that we were included as citizens of the Constitution. That's why the prophet said, when I return you back to the constitutional fold, there's no need for no 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was just as a result of when they freed you from slavery, you didn't declare Moorish nationality, you had no status, you had no standing. So they had to concoct something to give you some semblance of standing, to make you feel like you was a citizen, and so they came up with the 14th Amendment, which gave you the right to sue and gave you some of the privileges of a citizen. But think about it. In the preamble it says, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union. If you was made a citizen in 1867 with the 14th Amendment, that means you wasn't part of we the people in the preamble, who set the whole thing up in the first place. There's two different sets of citizens here. There's the preamble citizen that set the whole thing up, and there's the 14th Amendment citizen who's given the rights, that's privilege that's make them think he's a citizen. And they have the right to assume that you're a 14th Amendment citizen until you outrightly proclaim otherwise. That's why the prophet said, with us, you must proclaim your Moorish nationality. Because that lets them know, I'm not the one. Don't treat me like I'm some Negro 14th Amendment citizen. I'm out here proclaiming to you, I'm a Moor. I'm part of the preamble citizen of this Constitution. That's why the prophet said, I'm trying to return you back to the constitutional fold. Because within that, all your rights are secure. It's the citizens that makes the nation. The government can't give you rights. We in the civil rights struggle, begging for rights, begging for this. The government can't give you rights. It's the people that gives rights to the government. The people have the sovereign rights. And when they come together collectively and say, let's form a government, they delegate some of their sovereign rights to the government so it can do its work. They give them the rights, not the other way around. You can't beg the government for rights. They look at you like, ooh, you don't understand how this works. If you begging me for a right, I'll give it to you for a minute, but I can snatch it right back from you. So we just got to understand how this thing really works here. You cannot beg them for that. This is proof. You want some more proof? As to who we were here in the Sunday? Like they say, the proof was in the pudding. I didn't devise these documents. I didn't make these documents up myself. This is taken from the Journal of the House of Representatives, 1789 to 1790. It says, a petition was presented to the House from sundry free Moors, subjects of the Emperor of Morocco, and residents in the state, praying that in case they should commit any fault amenable to be brought to justice, that they, as subjects to a prince in alliance with the United States of America, may be tried under the same laws as the citizens of the state will be liable to be tried, and not under the Negro Act, which was received and read. Which means here's a group of Moors who when they passed that Negro Act, they said, don't put us under that Negro Act. We Moors, and we have a treaty. They said, subject to a prince in alliance with the United States. That means we had a treaty. That's why they had to get you out of your Moorish nationality. Because as a Moor, they could not enslave you because of the treaties. So they had to snatch you up at birth, send you over here, raise you up, turn you to the descendants of some Negroes they brought in West Africa, on the state parks in West Africa. And when you classify yourself under that term, in the state books, they had to know the property with no rights a white person is bound to respect. That's what the federal government told Dred Scott. They said, well, look, in your own deposition, you said you were a Negro descendant of West African slave, To us, that means property. Thus, we can't take you out of your owner's hands because we'll be taking the people's property, and they're protected by the Bill of Rights from that. So we can't do nothing for you. Go back, study, and then claim your words and then come correct. You see, that's what they was really saying. You see? So the proof is in the pudding. That there was those of us even then who still knew who we were. And when they try to pass on these Negro Acts, we say, kill that noise. We Moors. And when you look, I'll get to you in a minute more, when you look in the Black Coast of Virginia, you will see certain codes in the Black Coast of Virginia, certain codes in the Black Coast of Virginia, And it says that all shall be considered slaves, so on and so forth, except for Turks and Moors. I don't know if I'm reading the right one here.
7005, too, on the top.
Yeah, there was a part in here too, though. Anyway, they're saying that all shall be considered slaves, except for Moors and Turks and amity. I don't know if I have the right one here. It says Moors and Turks and amity. And amity means you have an outstanding treaty of peace and friendship. Now, these was dated from 1705. So I said, wait a minute. If the Moroccan treaty wasn't signed in 1787, what treaties are they talking about? Treaties of Moors and Turks and amity. And I thought about it, I said, wait a minute. They were still considered, to take stock?
No, you got
They were still considered citizens of England until they declared their independence. So I said, let me see if there's any treaties with England in the wars. And sure enough, from like 1632 up to 17 something, there was kind of over a dozen treaties between Emperor Morocco and England. And under those treaties, they couldn't enslave Moors. That's why they had to get you out of your true name. That's why the prophet had to come back and get you back in your true name. So you got to understand, the Moors had enslaved the Europeans on a massive scale. Before we was enslaved, here you see the European women. The European women were sold into the harems of wealthy noble Moors as commodities. That's why it was the Moors nobility was the first to get bleached out. Because they was the only ones able to afford these white women in their harems. And that was the beginning of what we call racism, because they noticed that the noble classes started getting lighter in the skin, and the lighter in the skin began to be associated with the nobility. And the Europeans just came and capitalized, and I said, well, wait, they're already associating lighter skin with nobility. We as light as you would get. So we the guy. If you have that thought. You see what I'm saying? So they played it. They played up on it. All right? Here you have another picture of the Europeans being sold into slavery. All right, I'm just going to get through it real quick, and I want to try before the things stop here. And I'm going to keep it. Remember what you was going to say. But I just got a couple more things I want to show. Here you see European women being sold into slavery. And here I found something that was bugged out. You see, most of us don't realize up until the 1800s, the Europeans were still paying tribute to the Moors. I found a picture of an American captain paying tribute to the Bay of Algiers. Here's an American captain. It says on the bottom, an American captain is delivering tribute money to the Bay of Algiers. And here you see he's reluctant. He's like, damn, I don't want to deliver this money. And the Bay says, put that money down there. And right here you see the bags of gold right down in the bottom. And you see the Moors from the D-Wan, from the Bokhara holding the sword, the scimitar sword, saying, you don't put that down, it's going to take your head off. These brothers was no joke. Now, if you don't believe it, check out a book called The Diplomatic Relations of the Barbary Powers and the European nations, and it says the English, French, Dutch, Danes, and Swedes, and I may say all nations are tributary to them, the Algerians. Talking about how all of us still paying tribute up until the 1800s. It says, hold on.
What was the name of that book?
I'm trying to go fast here. United States and Barbary Powers. And that chapter is called Sovereigns of the Mediterranean. It's a hard book to find now. These kids are snatched. Ever since I started talking about it, it disappeared out of libraries left and right. I think his brother's going up in there and just snatching them up, you know what I'm saying? But can't find it no more. That's why I'm trying to document the stuff before all this appears. They talk about how they had whole institutions set up just for the redemption of slaves from the Moors. How they had whole organizations whose sole purpose it was, like it says, the members of this, it says, the release of prisoners was usually obtained by money rather than force. Redemption was such an important item that for centuries there was maintained an order of the Holy Trinity and redemption of captives with headquarters in Paris and agents throughout the Barbary. The members of this organization was known as Mathurians for the Church of St. Mathurian. They devoted their energies to securing funds for the redemption of captives. You had whole organizations whose sole purpose was to try and get white European slaves back from the Moors. They didn't try and fight them. They was gathering money to pay them for it. All right? And one other thing, and I got to save the rest for the next lecture, but then I'll do some question and answers, is I have here a letter from the Emperor Morocco to the Emperor, from George Washington. This is George Washington's own handwriting to the Emperor Morocco. And in it, I have it in here, issue number 5, I have a full thing in here, and I have the printout that says, "Dear great and magnanimous friend." So here's George Washington referring to the Emperor Morocco as the great and magnanimous friend, which means he knows him. He's familiar with him. You don't know a man is magnanimous until you know him. All right? And it says here, since the date of the letter which the late Congress by the President addressed to your Imperial Majesty. Here's George Washington. They so-called declared independence from King George of England, and he's referring to the Emperor Morocco now as your Imperial Majesty. This is after the Declaration of Independence. And he says here, he just goes on and on. He's apologizing that he didn't get a chance to send a letter in a little while because it was involved in the Revolutionary War. And so I just put that there to show you, make you understand that there's much more to this than meets the eye. And I'm going to end it with what the prophet was trying to say. So now you understand in a better context of what the prophet was trying to say when he addressed the nation. And he gave his warning, because remember, a prophet sent to warn the nations. He says here, the citizens of all free national governments, according to their free national constitution, are all of one family bearing one free national name. Those who fail to recognize the free national name of their constitutional government are classified as undesirable and are subject to all inferior names, abuses, and mistreatments that the citizens care to bestow upon them. And it is a sin for any group of people to violate the national constitutional laws of a free national government and cling to the names and principles that allude to slavery. I, the prophet, was prepared by the great God of Allah to warn my people to repent from their sinful ways and go back to the state of mind of their forefathers, divine and national principles, that they will learn, that they will be law-abiders and receive the divine right of citizens according to the free national constitution that was prepared for all free national beings by our forefathers. They are to claim their own free national name and religion. There is but one issue for them to be recognized by this government and the nations of the earth, and it comes only through connection with the Moorish divine national movement, which is incorporated in this government and recognized by all other nations of the world, and through it, they and their children can receive the divine rights unmolested by other citizens. And he goes on and on, but the key, what he's trying to say there, is that as long as we call ourselves Negroes, all this stuff, we will suffer all kind of abuses. Because you have no standing in society. You declare the Moorish nationality and connect with the Moorish divine national movement that is recognized by this government and all the governments of the world. I have here letters from ambassadors recognizing what the prophet has done. And on that note, I just want to mention also, we have brother. He don't want me to do it, but I gotta do it. This is the most humble brother.